Hey, it's Lawrence bringing you another episode on High Intensity Business. This is episode 328. And in this podcast, I am interviewed by Fit20's UK Managing Director, Niri Patel, who turns the tables on me to learn about some of the common themes I've identified in the podcast and Hit Business Membership in my own experience in terms of some of the most important things we need to focus on to build successful strength training studios. We kick off by digging into how to drive leads, and specifically, I talk about how combining a story brand marketing approach with business networking like BNI can be a very powerful way to drive leads into your business. This is something I have done in our business and has also been proven in other high-intensity training or strength training studio businesses as well. And we then focus on the 4 key principles that I believe go into a world-class sales process so you can start converting at least 70% of your free workouts. And then lastly, we focus on the all-important aspects of client retention, and I give you key strategies and tactics that will significantly improve your client retention in your strength training studio. Now, all of these, as I said, all of these proven strategies have been sourced from patterns that I've seen on the podcast, in Hit Business Membership, and also in my own strength studio business. So if you're hungry for ways to improve your strength training studio, you're going to absolutely love this episode. And before we get started, I want to highlight Hit Business Membership. Most strength training studio owners struggle to get more clients. Hit Business Membership provides how-to guides from successful strength training studio owners so you can start to grow your high-intensity training studio with confidence. Join the membership today and go to highintensitybusiness.com/join. And without any further ado, please enjoy this tactically rich podcast with yours truly and Fit20's Niri Patel.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the High Intensity Business Podcast. In case you're thinking, oh, what's going on here? Where's Lawrence? He usually hosts these. We've decided today to do something a little bit different, to turn the tables on Lawrence and to actually put the spotlight on him. He's spent years contributing knowledge and expertise and bringing great thought leaders in this area to the high intensity community. So we thought it'd be a great way to give back to him. A, to put the spotlight on him. B, to actually tap into some of his own knowledge and experience and expertise. And then C, perhaps at the end, to also maybe probe into how we might be able to help him to continue and expand his ability to help all of us in this wonderful community. So let's start with a hello and welcome to your own show, Lawrence. How are you today?
This feels very surreal. I'm doing great, Niri. Thank you for doing this. I've really been looking forward to having this conversation. I try not to put the spotlight on myself very much because I think people are probably more interested in my guests and what they have to say. But I do obviously have the advantage of having done at this stage over 300 podcasts with lots of people in our industry, and tons and tons and tons of content inside my membership program. So I feel like I've got all these great ideas. And sometimes I make the mistake of just assuming that everyone else knows this stuff because they've all been listening to it with me. But obviously that's not true because, you know, people are far too busy doing other things and focusing on things in their lives, and they're not always listening to my show or remembering all the content. And so I've got, I guess, that advantage where I can just remind people of some of the key principles, things that are proven to work in our industry to help them grow their business.
Fabulous. So let's start with learning a little bit more about who you are. So, you know, what's your background and how did you get into this particular line of work?
So my background is I went to university when I was in my, 19, I think, 18, 19. And I only went to university because that was the done thing, right? I was a bit of a sheep. So all my friends wanted to go. I remember going to the job center looking for work in case I didn't get into university. And I quickly realized I didn't want a job because I was a bit lazy and I'd rather just go and party for 3 years, right? And so I thought, right, I'll go to university. And I thought, well, what subject am I going to do? Well, English is my natural strength, so I'll go and study English. And just to make it a little bit less boring, I'll do media studies as well. So I did English and media. So you can tell at this stage of life, I really don't have a clue what I'm doing. I don't really have a purpose or why. I'm just kind of following the crowd and following social pressure. Although I did have a great time at uni. That's so for Americans listening, that would also be college, and we call it university. And And, I made some great friends. I definitely grew up. I became more mature. So it was a productive experience for me, at least. So then I come out of university and I accidentally stumble into a sales role, even though I was pursuing a marketing role. So someone pitched me a role for telemarketing, and I thought that sounds like marketing, and it's really not. It's telesales, as you know, Neri.
Right.
And so I was quite upset about that when I realized it wasn't really marketing, but it was just phone-based sales. But I actually ended up being really good at it, which was a bit of a surprise. So I ended up realizing and learning that I was quite good at building relationships and could be quite persuasive and quite a good communicator and articulate. And so that worked really well. And I quickly became one of the top salespeople in that business. And then I got the bug for selling, really. And I thought, I could really make a good career out of this. I could make really good money. And so I wanted to try and pursue bigger and better things in the realm of sales. And so then I ended up in London working in technology sales. And I went for a few companies doing that. And I ended up at a company called Node4, who provide like managed services. They're actually based in Derby, so not far from you, in terms of their head office. And so I was selling complex technology services to businesses that included hosting, like server hosting, business internet, all the rest of it, and then plugging it all together. And that went really well, and I had a pretty successful career doing that. But I was never really truly passionate about the product, although I did believe in the value we were offering and providing. But I did love selling, and I did love business. And I loved, because always the best salespeople were the ones who showed a lot of interest in the customer and their actual business and how they make money and how they achieve their objectives, right? And digging, right? So really understanding like, okay, well, you've got this IT infrastructure that you want to improve, but how does it actually help you make more widgets or help you make, deliver services for your customers, and understanding that whole chain of events in detail. And obviously by doing that, my prospects or my customers were much more endeared to me because I thought this guy really cares about business. He understands it. Whereas my, contemporaries, other salespeople from other businesses weren't really like that for the most part. So that helped me stand out. And so I had a passion, as I said, for learning about business, and always had a passion for entrepreneurship. And then, during this adventure in sales, which lasted almost 10 years, about 8 years in my 20s, I was always playing around with businesses on the side. And we touched on this when we spoke about on the podcast last time. And, trying little online businesses and all sorts of things, different health and fitness concepts. I had a paleo diet website at one point. And nothing ever worked out. I even had a website on time management specifically for salespeople, right? But it was an awful website. It's horrible design thinking about it now. And through trial and error, I eventually landed on. I should say I stumbled across the first sort of trigger event that started the business I'm in now. Was coming across Doug McGuff's presentation at the 21 convention, where he basically talked about high intensity training and went through the biochemistry to the 21 convention seminar audience. And it's still on YouTube. It's amazing. I still revisit it now. And then from there, I read Body by Science. And as they say, the rest is history. You can't unlearn it, right, after you learn it. And then that was like kind of gave me an aha moment. I thought, well, this is an incredible value proposition, this time efficient training. Maybe I could build a business around this. And then I started a new blog. I called it Corporate Warrior. So a lot of my longtime listeners will have maybe even a romantic relationship with that name because it goes way back. And then I was fortunate enough to interview Dr. Doug McGuff at the very beginning. He was very kind and gracious of his time, especially when I had no real following. And then it all just went from there. And obviously the podcast grew and the podcast became quite popular. But then over time, I needed to turn it into a real business. It was kind of like a hobby, to be honest, at the time. I was just recording these podcasts, learning a lot. So it was valuable, but it wasn't really making a living and I was still working. And so in order to actually make that transition, I had to think of what could I actually create that would be valuable, that I could obviously charge money for. And that's when I came up with the idea of Hit Business Membership, where we basically help strength training studio owners grow their business with content, community, and expert Q&As. And that's just worked really, really well. And so that's been a huge focus of mine over the last few years in terms of, improving that and growing that community. Obviously I did have things like, podcast sponsorships and things like that, but it wasn't really a sustainable, predictable way, at least in my experience, to grow a business. So that's sort of a potted history of how we got to here. And then obviously the irony is that I built this community, and whilst I have obviously learned a lot listening to the experts, and I have a fair amount of business acumen and sales skills, I've always, for the most part, deferred to a lot of my podcast guests and collaborators for the expertise, right? People like Luke Carlson and Owen Dockham and Skylar Tanner and all the rest of them. And so now I've actually started my own strength training studio in Galway with a close friend of mine, and we've called it Optima Strength, and it's going great. And I'm implementing obviously a lot of what I've learned, and I'm learning my own things along the way. And so now I feel like I'm in a position where I have a lot to share in terms of things that I feel work really well and things that don't work. But we're still in the early stages of that business. And that's where we are today. So I'm very much focused now on obviously growing Optima Strength, the studio business, and then also continuing to build on high intensity business. And we have a number of different programs and courses and things like that we sell to help people grow their high intensity training business.
Fantastic. And I think we'll dive into some of those learnings and best practices that you've gleaned over the years and put to the test in just a second. But before we do that, a couple of quick questions from sharing your background. Where did you grow up and where did you go to university?
Good question. So I grew up in Portsmouth, which is south of England. I went to university in Chichester, which is West Sussex, so just neighbouring county to Hampshire, where Portsmouth is, yeah.
Right, thank you. I was just curious as you were talking. I wonder where you went. So fabulous. Thank you for sharing your journey with us. Now, one of the things that we share in common is an experience with BNI, Business Network International. And as any business owner, but in particular, if you own a studio or a gym in the high intensity space, we have to get the word out there because we have something that is incredibly efficient and effective, but is not as well known as it could or should be yet. And that's kind of our joint mission, to take this to more people around the world. So generating leads, if you will, is really, really important. What can you share there that would be helpful to the audience?
Yeah, so great way to start. I think, there's obviously a number of different tactics that studio owners can employ to generate leads for their business. But one of the ones that I'm most excited about at the moment and has been really effective for me, but also really effective for our colleagues, is business networking, and in particular BNI. But what I'm about to share really applies to any kind of business networking group you might be a part of or might join. So I'm going to go into some things about BNI, but again, this all applies to other networking groups. But I'm just going to touch on some key points that I think are helpful in making the most out of BNI and networking, but also giving listeners some confidence into why and how it works. The first thing I will say, is that I think it's my experience that most people in BNI just aren't very prepared at all. So when they come to do a 60-second presentation, which you get to do every week, which is your opportunity to remind the room what your value proposition is, how you solve problems, who you help, how they can find you referrals, they're just not very well prepared. And that's really bad because you only get obviously one opportunity every week to do that. And it's a really valuable opportunity to get that right. And so I think one of the best things we can all do is read the book Story Brand by Donald Miller and or Marketing Made Simple by Donald Miller, and use his framework to design your 60 seconds. Now, his framework goes well beyond doing a good 60-second speech, and it'll probably transform your entire business and your website and everything because his work is phenomenal. And I hat tip to Luke Carlson for telling me about StoryBrand for about 3 years until I actually picked the book up, right? But a lot of their marketing strategy is based around it. And what I did is I use a StoryBrand approach, and I won't go through the whole thing right now because I want the listeners to craft their own 60 seconds. But essentially, what you're doing is you're saying, this is you're treating your audience like they're the customer, right? And so I'm looking at the BNI room, and I'm actually pitching them as if they're a client, and I'm saying, this is what you want, and this is your current problem, and this is how you solve that, right? And that's what the StoryBrand framework does. And what I deliberately did is I deliberately used a StoryBrand framework to sell to the room, because I wanted to get everyone in the room for a free workout so that they can then experience the workout. I can give them a really high quality experience, and then they'll build trust in me. So then they'll bring me referrals. And obviously I want to acquire them as clients as well. And that actually works really well, because it's only been 2 meetings. And I think I've got 4 free workouts booked and acquired 1 customer from the group, right? Which is great. And that's only 2 meetings, right? That's only 2 hours of my time. So that works really well. And then what I will do after probably a few meetings of doing it in that way, so in terms of selling to the room, is actually change my pitch, still do it around StoryBrand, but instead make it more about, how can I arm the room to go out and get me referrals, right? To figure out who can I help, who would I like to work with, that kind of thing. So that's the shift that will happen after a couple of weeks. But I think in the beginning, it's a good idea to focus on selling to the room first and actually getting those guys in for a free workout. And since most of them are going to be in your target market, most of them are going to be busy professionals, then it's usually quite a good fit. Now, if anyone's skeptical, because I know there'll be listeners to this saying, I did BNI and it was crap and I didn't get any return on investment and blah, blah, blah. So I've heard plenty of stuff like that. And the reality is I'll start off with a couple of testimonials. So Live Oak Strength, who are a personal training studio in San Francisco run by Owen Dockham and his wife, Lucy. And they attributed 50 to 75% of their revenue in the beginning completely to BNI. So over the first few years, 50 to 75%. It's either 50 or 75. I can't remember. So I'm just saying 50 to 75. But it's a significant portion, right, of revenue in the beginning. Discover Strength. Luke Carlson spent loads of time in BNI at the beginning to grow Discover Strength. And now every location has a trainer or manager who is a member of a BNI to help grow that particular studio. So it's a proven strategy, not only obviously in high intensity training businesses, but in businesses all over the world. They're BNI very public about the returns they provide their members. And it's very impressive. And they're just a proven concept. Now, I think the reason why a lot of people don't get something out of BNI is because they're not really trying, they're not really investing time. So I wanted to just end this first part of this podcast by just describing, I guess, giving 3 main tips that I think would give people a better ROI from BNI. The first one is you've got to be invested, right? So you've got to carve out time in your diary every week where you can actually figure out how you're going to provide value to the members. How are you going to find business, right? So every week, without fail, on a Tuesday morning, I have 2 hours blocked out in my diary. And in that time, what I'm going to do is schedule one-to-ones with members so I can learn about their business. Figure out how I can find referrals, looking at my own contact directory and figuring out if I can connect anyone. Doing some sort of continuous education units with BNI so I can learn more about how I can be an asset. So that time is protected, right? I'm not going to book anything else in that time. And I think that's part of the key to this is like have the discipline to block out time in your diary for important stuff to do in your business every week and actually protect it, right? I also think that in personal training, we have a big advantage because we're building these personal, the keys in the word, right? Relationships with our clients. And that means that they're generally going to become quite close to us and share things with us that they might not share with their other business acquaintances. And that opens up even more opportunities to find referrals. So I think you've just got to be very tuned into waiting for those opportunities when your client might say, oh, my my accountant's being a real pain. I don't know the kinds of things they might say. But looking out for those opportunities and then saying, hey, you know what? I know a really good accountant. Would you like me to make you an introduction? And then last thing I'll say is less is more. And this is again one of those common things that happens in our industry is we become so scattered in our approach to trying to drive leads into the business. We try Facebook ads, we try email campaigns, we try BNI, we try handing out leaflets, we try all these different tactics, but we spread ourselves so thin that we don't really get a return from any of them. And I personally think that if you're a startup, even if you're been in this game for a while, but you've just plateaued in terms of growth, if you just focused on BNI and then operational experience, which is then going to lead to word of mouth referral, which is a separate thing, which we won't touch on today, but we can touch on another time. I think you've probably you've got everything there in terms of potential marketing activity to grow your business. And I don't know, for me, I don't know about you, Neri, but for me, it's like, that gets me excited to think, I'd much rather seek out the 80-20, seek out the thing that's going to get a massive return and spread myself over, 5, 6, 7, 8 different initiatives. That's just going to overwhelm me. And I'm a very busy guy. I've got, multiple businesses, a family. I want to know that I'm using my time well. So I think that's key, at least for me. And I think it would be helpful to a lot of the listeners to try that. So that would be go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I would go so far as to say that, how high intensity training is to getting in shape and being really well conditioned. I'd say BNI is the equivalent of that for your business, because if you did just one thing and really focused on it, you'd kind of take care of all the building blocks from which to develop your business on. So yeah, that's great. Thank you for those 3 tips.
That was an amazing analogy. I wish I'd thought of that, but I totally agree. It's the HIT equivalent to marketing.
There you go. And now we've got it captured on the podcast for everyone to hear. How awesome is that? And just to touch on what you said about, the room, you tend to attract people in BNI who are there to help each other. So you don't really have to sell. It's a very soft sell. The thing you have to sell is, look, please just give a bit of your time to come and experience a workout with me. Because when they do, they'll see how genuine you are, how caring you are, how much of a good person you are, that if they did send anyone, you'd look after them and help them on their journey. And as soon as you do that, of course, the whole group that are members, you'll get most of them, and then they start referring on and away you go. And that's where maybe another session from you on how to get those word of mouth referrals and recommendations triggered would be fantastic. Okay, super. So if we can move on to the next point here, is you've got leads, you've got a referral, you've got somebody who's potentially wanting to know about what you do and what you offer. What's the process that you take people through to actually turn them from somebody who says, look, this could be interesting, or maybe I should do it, to saying, absolutely, I'd love to do this?
Yeah. So now obviously we're on to sales. We're on to talking about the sales process. And just before I continue on this, I have actually done a really detailed checklist that I'll link to in the blog post for this. I don't know what the episode number of this will be, but if you just search Neri Patel, it will come up. But there'll be a link to a checklist. I'm not going to go through the whole checklist because we'll be here all day, but I will go through again 3 or 4 key points from that I think are really important. But the checklist is literally the entire sales process for making sure you maximize conversions in your studio business. And that checklist is obviously influenced by, my experience in sales. And I have a strong track record there. $10 million worth of contract value in my last employer. So I have a strong pedigree in that, but it's also taking all of the lessons shared by guests on the podcast as well. And in particular, Luke Carlson, and he knows that already. So just want to say that first. There'll be a link to the full checklist. But the first thing I want to mention is, I think the first thing is you have to have someone, or you yourself have to be good at sales, or have to be good at building relationships with people. So I think, firstly, if that's not yourself, then you may need to hire someone or partner with someone who has that. right? I think, and if you're not willing to get good at it yourself, then needless to say, you'll need to partner with someone who's got that appetite, right? So that's the first thing, and maybe that's relatively obvious. The second thing I wanted to talk about is the consultation. Now, again, I know, Neri, I said to you, at the start of this, like, I know obviously Fit20 have a certain way of doing things. So these are only my thoughts, and obviously listeners of my podcast who are Fit20 owners can, maybe they can choose to implement these or not. That's totally fine. And obviously they might be valuable to other listeners as well. But the first thing I want to touch on is the consult. So the way I do things before I put someone for a workout, I think almost all of us do this, is I sit down with the prospect and just understand their own goals, interests, motivation, injury, medical history, past experience, all of those things. And that's obviously really important, because until you know that, you don't really know what the prospect's problems are and why they're in there in the first place, and how you're actually going to persuade them to become a client. And so you have to do that first. And I think the key in that phase is being a great listener. I think too many of us talk over the client. We ask a client what their interests or goals are, and a client starts to answer that. And then we step in and we go, oh yeah, let me tell you what I think about that. It's not about you. It's about them. Think about, I think the listen-speak ratio should be something like 80-20, like 80% you listen and 20% speaking, something like that. And that really is going to do a lot of the work for you. Let them do the work for you. Let them explain all of the problems that you can then solve. So the next bit comes down to, once they've actually done the consult, you've finished going through those questions, you're then going to be talking about the workout. They've never experienced strength training before in the way we do it. So you want to describe to them your philosophy. And the way I would do it is give a very simple overview of, your training method. Maybe you do single set to failure to muscle failure, and explain to them what that is in layman speak and what the workout looks like. But then you can address all of the problems they outlined in the consult. So maybe they said they want to lose body fat or improve bone strength or whatever. You can say, well, body fat is mostly affected by what you do with diet. However, you should strength train to hold on to muscle. Your improved insulin sensitivity will help you metabolize food better. All of these things, right? So you're not talking about, building big muscles, right? Or improving cardiovascular fitness. You're just addressing the problems that they mentioned were meaningful to them, right, during the consult. And I think if you do that, and then obviously you can, towards the end, you can say, well, just so you know, you are triggering a vast number of benefits when you do this, including cardiovascular conditioning, more muscle mass, strength, all the rest of it. But you focus mainly on the problems they've mentioned. And if you do that, you've pretty much, it's hard to mess it up from that stage, right? If you've done that well, they're going to be really receptive, and they're much more likely to move forward with you at the end. And another thing you don't want to do, again, is start talking about a whole load of stuff that isn't relevant to what they shared of you in the consult, because you'll just bore them. And there's definitely a history of high intensity training practitioners, passionate people in HIIT, who like to talk about the history of Arthur Jones and Mike Mensa and all of that stuff. And we love talking about that in our community, but the customer just doesn't care for the most part, or they just get overwhelmed by it all. And there's no reason why you can't drip feed that stuff in over time as you educate them, as you put that into maybe your proactive educational process to retain them. Sure, you can start, educating them on why this stuff's important and why it's good to know. But that's the key, really, to getting the consult right. And now I've made some notes here because I want to make sure I get everything. I mentioned everything that I think is really important. But in the second to last thing I say in terms of the sales process for the introductory workout is you've got to deliver an amazing workout. Now, obviously, if you're a Fit20 business owner listening to this, and I'm sure you've got a wonderful process, but for everyone else listening, I'm just going to share some really key points. And again, I want to credit Discover Strength, Luke and Discover Strength, for sharing a lot of this stuff with me. And then I've been putting it into practice, and all the listeners have been putting it into practice and getting really great conversions and sales. So I think an amazing workout goes about saying, they have to feel, you should get them as close to or to muscle failure in that workout. And they have to feel the sensation that provides on the body, right? Because it's unlike anything they would have experienced in the past. And if they don't say something along those lines at the end, like, wow, that was so unique or profound, or that was so different, then I don't think you've done the workout properly. And then in terms of actually delivering amazing workout, you've also got to make sure you provide specific positive and corrective feedback, right? So when they're not doing something correctly, maybe their form is not great, or they start holding their breath, you need to be able to give specific guidance on how they can correct that during the set, because they're going to see enormous value in that. Wow, this expert trainer, keyword expert, is actually helping me improve my ability to exercise safely, right? And in specific is key here, because you don't want to overwhelm them with verbiage during the exercise. You want to be very succinct and specific. If they're holding their breath, just simply saying, breathe, right? Yeah, exactly. Neri. And the other thing as well is specific positive feedback, right? Like I've seen trainers where the client's training and they're training so perfectly, the trainer is completely silent. And that's a bad thing, because you're not then reinforcing the things they're doing well. So when they start getting towards muscle failure and they start using lots of body English and form starts falling apart, then they're less likely to train with good form at the end. So instead, when they're training really well from the beginning, you should be reinforcing what they're doing well. The shoulder press, for example, Med-X chest press. Great job keeping the shoulders down. Great job breathing. Oh, your speed of movement is so smooth. Maintain that. Keep that going now, And what you find is when someone gets to muscular failure, that's reinforced that positive habit, and they're more likely to train productively at the end of the set. So I think that's really key. And people really just appreciate that feedback. And again, that is going to increase your likelihood of converting the sale significantly. And I really like this one. This is, again, I credit Luke for this. And I'm going to paraphrase here a little bit, but the kind of essence, the thing you're trying to capture in their experience with you is that you as a trainer desire the client to get great results more than the client does. Right? So you care more about the results than they do. I think that's powerful, and it's really profound when they can sense that, And at least, well, in my experience, I've just found that people really pick that up, right? And that's why, as a trainer, I think you always have to be on top of your game. And then I just say it again, because I think it's important to say again, is by doing those things, and being an effective personal trainer, and by focusing on things like specific positive and corrective feedback, you are more likely to get someone to or close to muscle failure and deliver those sensations and that emotional high, which is then more likely to lead to a sale. And then once you've done that, if you've done those things correctly, and again, I'll provide the link to that checklist, which is more detailed, the sale will probably take care of itself. I mean, pretty much every free workout I do, they do the workout and they go to me, okay, well, how do I move forward? Like, how does it work? Right? I don't have to say anything, right? But there will be the occasional time where they don't say that. And you have to say, how would you like to move forward? Would you like to get started with our one-on-one training? Or whatever your service offering is. And you want to be, assumptive with that. You want to be assumptive that they want to move forward with you. And then obviously if they're not ready to move forward with you at that point, then you need to obviously be gracious and understanding and learn why. And, maybe they'll join later, who knows? So those are my big tips for nailing the sales process. And as I said, there'll be a checklist for, step-by-step if listeners want to take that and implement that in their business.
Fantastic. I'm really excited to see that checklist when it's published. As you were going through it, I could hear myself, because Fit20 have an academy for franchise owners and our expert certified personal trainers. And as you were going through that, I was like, okay, that's that section covered. That's that section covered. So it was great to hear that from you. And I love the distinction about the positive reinforcement about what they're doing correct when they're not quite, they just started out the exercise and you're reinforcing that. So as they get to failure, they can't concentrate and it is overwhelming. They're just focused on keeping that weight where it needs to be. So you're inroading beautifully there. I love that distinction. I've never quite heard it like that. We do the positive reinforcement in our protocols, but to explain it that way, fabulous, really, really good. And as you were talking, I had a picture of Bram Kroska, who's the head of Fit20 Global Training, He's our master trainer globally at Fit20. And I thought, yeah, I've seen Bram do that. I've seen Bram do that. I've seen Bram do that. So obviously sharing some great stuff. And Luke sounds absolutely amazing. I'm going to dive into some more of his stuff there.
Oh, you have to. You must. I want to be a fly on the wall in one of your academy meetings. That'd be a lot of fun.
We'd love to have you come and see some of that. Okay, so you've generated a lead. Somebody comes along. You give them a great experience, if I could use that to sum up that whole process, to where they say, actually, you know what? This could work for me. I'm going to give it a shot. The proof of the pudding's in the eating. Let's go with it. Let's sign up for whatever period, and they come along. So I start training with you, right? Once a week or thereabouts. How do you keep people coming back? Because the best form of exercise, I believe, is the one you keep doing. You could have a great protocol, but if someone's not doing it, it's not going to help them. So how do you retain those clients? What tips and tricks have you got for our listeners?
Yeah, so let's dig into client retention. Obviously, again, I'm going to focus on just a couple things that I think are really productive. And there's obviously lots you can do in terms of tactical things you can do for retention. And the first thing I'll say is I think we, as an industry, need to be more focused on retention than we are. I think too many of us, and I see it all the time, I get emails all the time about this, are just focused on looking for ways to acquire new customers, but neglect retaining the existing. When the irony is that actually by really focusing on retention, you're probably more likely to generate referrals, which will then take care of some of your new acquisition problems. And obviously it's easier to generate revenue from existing clients than it is through acquiring new clients. So that's another thing to think about. So I'll start off with just some very simple but overlooked principles that Luke was very kind to share with me or remind me about in some content we did in Hit Business Membership, where we basically show you how to build a referral machine. But it's obviously, so it's how to build a referral machine, but this stuff is really important for retention as well. And it's just 3 simple things that are going to just seem ridiculous when I say them. As we're always looking for, complex solutions to our problems, because otherwise, how can that be? How can it be so simple? But the reality is, I don't know whether it's because we're so overwhelmed in our lives or whatever it is, but we just forget to do these simple things, and many of us, and myself included at times. So the first one is just saying please and thank you, being polite, being respectful, showing great manners with our clients, being appreciative for their coming in for their workouts. I don't know about you, but I'm a real stickler whenever I have an experience of a service-based business and I don't hear those words being used, or you're welcome. And when you do hear it, you're like, hang on a second. That's what I'm talking about, right? And it's refreshing. And obviously in America, I think they're so much better at this, to be honest with you, than a lot of the businesses I've experienced in Europe. There's just a culture there for great service, and obviously, well, the way I understand it, at least, is the hospitality industry isn't particularly well paid, and a lot of it's based on tips, right? So if they don't give awesome customer service, then they're not going to earn as much. But I just feel like, though, America just do so well with this for the most part. So that's number one. Say please and thank you. So Discover Strength have what's called a fine farewell. No, they have a warm welcome and a fine farewell, right? And they're really, really strict about making sure that every client experiences that whenever they come into the studio. And I think that's really special. And it just sounds so straightforward, but it's something that gets overlooked. And they know it's important because when they look at their Net Promoter Score, they look at customer feedback, they say things like, I like it that the trainer says thank you to me, right? And I have clients who are so busy that, and I'm sure you guys experience this, where they're leaving in such a hurry that sometimes I don't even get to say thank you. Like as they're running out the door, I'm like, thank you, Pat. Thank you, John. Yeah. And so, but yeah, it's really important.
They're getting their cardio in on the way out.
Right. Yeah. So the number 2 is be on time, right? Again, super straightforward, but I think this is perhaps one that gets overlooked. Maybe we're late for the odd session, and obviously that can have a big knock-on effect on our clients if you've got a tight schedule. So just being on time. And then number 3, do what you say that you're going to do, right? So if you say to a client, I'm going to email you a diet program, or Yeah. Even if it's something you put in conversation, like, oh yeah, I'm reading this great science fiction book. You'd love it. I'll send you an email, right? Send the email. I mean, Neri, like, I don't know about you, but I experience this all the time where I have conversations with people or I meet people and they say, oh yeah, I'll send you that. And they never do. Right. And it's not because they're bad people. It's because people are just used to making too many commitments and they're not following through. And it made me laugh so much when Luke was talking to me about this, because he was saying that when one of his staff say they're going to do something, he kind of stares at them really intently and really closely, and he stares through their soul, and he's like, you just realize you've made a commitment. You've got to follow through on that now, right? That just made me laugh so much, because he's so right. It's like, you've got to do that in order to actually get that person to do that. And I'm guilty of making this mistake. I promised a client I'd graph their results months ago, and I haven't done it. And no, that client, I'm not saying that's the reason that client hasn't given me a referral yet, but it certainly doesn't help. So that's just one of those simple key principles that I think is really important. So say please and thank you, be on time, and do what you say you're going to do. Right. So those are fundamental. And I think if we all did those things better, we would probably retain our clients for longer. I know I just talked about referrals. I think I got a bit off track there, but the point is you retain them for longer and probably also generate more referrals as well. The next thing I wanted to touch on, unless you got any comments on that, Neri.
Yeah, I think, you mentioned about the customer service in the States. I think over there it's expected.
Right.
Culturally, like you said, whereas here in the UK, it's exceptional. We had a situation in our head office studio, a gentleman called Matt, who's the franchise studio owner now. He bought that off us. And he said, a lady came in. We have a session with all our franchise owners every week. And in the huddle, we start off with what's the best thing that's happened since we last got together. Started positively, get a dopamine hit for sharing the progress. And Matt said, I had a lady who came in for a free introductory trial session. And she said it was brilliant customer service from start to finish. And then she shared that that's the industry she operates in. So, what a feather in her cap, in his cap, and a compliment. But in the UK, I think it's noticeable when it happens so well. And it shouldn't be the case, right? Everyone says, we provide good service. But that should be a norm. If you don't provide good service, you shouldn't be in business. It's expected. So that's a great tip. Be on time. I heard a beautiful saying, which actually, if you think about it, you're never on time because time is always moving. You're either early or you're late. And that changed my whole concept of punctuality. So there you go, little distinction.
Yeah, I love that.
I think the thing about, do what you said you would do is unconsciously we start to form perceptions about the person's reliability and credibility, even when we're not aware of it, but we start to judge them. And I think we do that with ourselves as well. And a great phrase I heard is, if you don't do what you know you can, you will wound your self-esteem and your sense of self. So really, really great point.
I love that. I think that was such a great summary that you just said there.
And, for me, those 3 points are so simple, but they're really about building and enhancing a relationship with someone. Again, it's personal training, right? 50% of the job title is its interpersonal skills, which is superb. So let me stop talking and back to you on retention.
Yeah, I'll just add to the last thing and just say, I'm actually trying to get into a habit of undercommitting now so that I can actually follow through on my commitments. And I think that's one solution to being able to actually, do what you say you're going to do and not kill yourself in the process. The next is, again, another sort of obvious one, I suppose, but maybe gets overlooked, is an engaging workout experience. Is the trainer, are you personable? Are you greeting? Again, it comes back to saying please and thank you, but are you making that client feel really special and important and welcome in every session they attend with you? And then intensity. I think this is again something that the Discover Strength team has shared with me a lot, and that's what they notice, that intensity and training hard and to or close to failure is probably one of the key factors to keep people coming back. And then coupled with that might be variety. So making sure that there is some variety in the exercise stimulus. That's probably up for debate, but that's certainly what they see. And I would say there's a little bit of a pattern of that when I talk to various studio owners, using a bit of variety to keep the client excited and motivated for their training. And I think that might lead to greater retention over the long term as well. So, and I like this as well. Just something, I don't know why it sticks in my mind, is something that Simon Shawcross said to me. He's a founder of Hit Uni. He said that he was training this senior lady. She's probably in her 90s, and he would train her pretty hard. And at the end, she said to Simon, "It feels like all of my cells are dancing." So I think the message here should be, how do you make it so that every client workout, after every workout, they feel like their cells are dancing? Like, I think that's quite a good way of capturing how someone should feel after a workout. And I think maybe over time, maybe the trainer gets demotivated, or what have you, but maybe they lose their motivation for the session, and then the client feels that, and they don't train as hard, and they don't get that same after workout feel, or maybe they don't get as good results, and they don't come back. So that would be my takeaway there. And then to really wrap up the retention, I would leave listeners with a little bit more of a tactical tip. I know there's other two things and maybe a little bit more simplistic, but this final takeaway is having a proactive retention process. So this is just some kind of educational process you have to ingrain the why behind the workout. I think, a lot of us think that as soon as someone experiences this, there's no way they're going to do anything else. But you'd be surprised the amount of times I hear clients leaving, or even trainers leaving high intensity training studios to do stuff that's completely ridiculous. F45, CrossFit, these other exercise modalities that are frankly nowhere near as productive or dangerous. And so we got to make a proactive effort to make sure that our clients understand the why behind what they're doing. And the way you can do that is through a weekly teaching focus. So just before the session, you could take 20 seconds to say, this week's focus is on the importance of training to muscular failure. And the reason we train in muscular failure is X, Y, and Z. And that's why we always train you to that every single workout. Done. Move on to the workout. And then next week, it might be, how strength training improves cardiovascular fitness, for example. And then this could also be done through education cards. So Discover Strength do this. And I think Discover Strength have inspired lots of studios to do this. I think Smart Strength do this at Skylar Tanner Studio, where they actually have these, small cards that they give to clients, maybe during the first 10 sessions. And each card will have a principle of the training, first do no harm, why it's the safest training there is, or something along those lines. And then you might want on the back have your contact details, so if they give that card to a friend, that they could, you could generate a lead through that. So that's another good way of ingraining the why and educating the clientele of why they're doing the workout this way. And the third one is building your email list. So making sure you're always capturing the emails of your clients, and then making sure you are sending clients emails on a weekly basis, educating them on the benefits of their workout and the reasons why you train in this particular way. So that if you do that enough and you use all these touch points, they can't escape. They'll get one of the touch points, right? And it will start to sink in, and that's going to help you retain that person longer, because they're really going to start to understand why this is the only training method that makes the most sense. So there you have it.
Yeah, I think the frequency and regularity of contact is really important, even if they're not actually looking at the email, because they're busy or distracted, or they just think, well, I go do my training, I don't care how it works. It seems to be all right. It'll be helping me whether I understand it or not. But then there'll come a day or a moment where they'll get hooked by what's in, and they'll read. And then, I've had this with things as well, that I've had that sort of response. But then think, oh, that's fascinating. Let me go through those other messages, and you build up the body of knowledge. So it's, when the student is ready, the teacher appears, right? The knowledge is right there. So that's really valuable. Fantastic. So we've looked at lead generation, we've looked at sales and conversion. We've given some great pointers on retention and building that relationship and keeping in regular contact. So that's a nice flow of that process. And then to wrap it up, I had a couple of questions that I've pulled out of the bag to put you on the spot, if you'll allow me, please. Really quickly, who would you love to have on your show?
Oh, wow. Ellington Darden, Dr. Ellington Darden. I'd have loved to have, obviously, Werner Kieser, and we were planning to collaborate together, and he sadly passed away, but I would love to have him. I just wanted to say that. Ken Hutchins would be another. Those would be top of my list.
Fabulous. So if you're listening or watching this broadcast and you know either of those two amazing people, please connect them to Lawrence. I think it would be a fascinating conversation for everyone involved. And to finish, if I could just ask you to share anything that the audience collectively or individually might be able to do to acknowledge the great work you do in bringing people and expertise together for the industry, and to thank you for giving all that you've done. What is it people could do apart from the obvious of listening and sharing the podcast? Is there anything we can do to be of help to you?
Yeah, well, obviously I don't expect anyone to be of help to me unless they're getting something in return. I don't expect that at all. But what I would say to people is if they are looking to start a strength training studio or have a strength training studio and they're struggling to grow or struggling to get clients, then I would definitely consider joining HIT Business Membership. So that's over at highintensitybusiness.com/join, where we have all sorts of content, experts to help you with these specific problems, like how to generate leads, close sales, build processes, systems, scale your business, everything. It's all in there. And we've merely scratched the surface today in terms of taking some of those best practices. So that would be my ask. But, I would never expect anyone to try and help me, off their own back without getting anything in return. I think it's much more rewarding to me if people join the membership because they want to grow their business.
Fabulous. Well, thank you for allowing me to turn the tables on you. And it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Neri. I really appreciate your time.